The night Marcus Calloway walked into that ballroom holding his 7-year-old daughter's hand, 38 people laughed at him. By the end of the evening, most of them were crying. This is not a story about a man who got lucky. This is a story about what happens when one person refuses, quietly, completely, without performance, to become someone his child would one day be ashamed of. And about the woman on the other side of the table who had been waiting 6 years for someone to simply sit down. The Hargrove Tower Hotel sat at the edge of the financial district like a man in an expensive suit who had long since stopped believing in himself. Its lobby chandeliers were original, brass and crystal, installed in 1961, and they scattered the February light in ways that made even ordinary people look like they belonged somewhere important. The annual Hargrove Restoration Gala raised money each year for displaced families, which meant it was attended mostly by people who had never been displaced, dressed in clothes that cost more than displacement, drinking wine selected by a sommelier whose salary alone could have housed a family of 4 for a year. Marcus Calloway knew none of this when his coworker, a well-meaning man named Pete, had leaned across the break room table 3 weeks earlier and told him there was a woman coming to the gala, quiet, serious, someone who kept to herself, and that Marcus ought to meet her. Pete had meant it kindly. He always meant things kindly. He had no idea what Derek Hollis had built around the same suggestion. Derek Hollis was the kind of man who had reached middle age without once examining himself. He ran the procurement division of the same facilities company where Marcus had worked for 4 years, and he had decided in the first week he met Marcus that Marcus's calm, careful manner was a kind of accusation. Men like Derek needed to be the loudest thing in any room. Marcus made rooms quieter simply by entering them, and Derek had never forgiven him for it. So when Pete mentioned the gala, Derek had heard something else. He had heard an opportunity. He had arranged, through a contact at the venue, for Marcus and a woman named Celeste to be seated at the same table in the hotel's West Gallery. He had told his 4 closest colleagues what he had planned, and they had laughed the way men laugh when they believe cruelty is the same thing as wit. What Derek had told them about Celeste was this, that she was a woman the city's social circuit had written off years ago. That she came from a family that had collapsed publicly and badly. That after a car accident had changed the way she moved through the world, the people who had once known her name had replaced it with another one, the broken girl from the Varden estate, and that she only appeared at events like this because no one had yet told her she was no longer welcome. What Derek had not told them, because he did not know, was anything true about Celeste Varden at all. Celeste had arrived at the Hargrove Tower that evening 40 minutes before the doors opened. She had asked the front desk for a quiet table in the West Gallery, away from the main reception hall, and she had sat with a glass of water and a leather notebook, moving her pen across the page in the unhurried way of someone who had learned to use stillness as armor. 6 years earlier, Celeste's father, the founder of Varden Group, a mid-sized hospitality investment firm, had been defrauded by a silent partner in a scheme so complete and so quiet that by the time anyone understood what had happened, there was nothing left to recover. Her father had died of a heart attack 11 weeks after the final court ruling. Her mother had retreated to a sister's house in another state and had not fully returned since. Celeste had been 23. She had taken the only job offered to her, administrative work at a competing firm, one that had once courted her father as a client, and she had done it without complaint and without explanation, because she had decided that survival did not require an audience. The car accident had come 2 years later. A delivery van, a wet intersection, a driver looking at his phone. The months that followed had taken from her the easy, unconscious confidence she had once moved through rooms with. She had rebuilt something in its place, but it was slower, more deliberate, and some rooms still noticed. The rooms always noticed. At a fundraiser the previous spring, a man in a gray vest had caught her eye across the table and said loudly that he admired her persistence, and the word had landed in her chest like something thrown. She was at the Hargrove Gala tonight for one reason: Varden Group, rebuilt, restructured, and now operating under her own name, had that morning completed a silent acquisition of the Hargrove Tower Hotel. She had told no one. She had asked Eleanor Voss, the general manager, not to announce her until she had observed the property herself. She wanted to see who people were when they did not know they were being watched. She was about to find out more than she had expected. Marcus had ironed his suit on the kitchen counter because he did not own an ironing board. He had done Sophia's braids twice, the first attempt uneven at the back, and Sophia had sat on the bathroom counter eating crackers from a small bag and telling him the second ones were much better, Daddy, very professional. He had smiled at that and tucked the word away the way he tucked away all the small things she gave him. Sophia had asked in the car whether they were going to a party. He had said yes, a kind of party. She had asked whether there would be cake. He had said probably not their kind of cake. She had accepted this with the gravity of a child who trusts the world's basic fairness and opened her coat to show Gray the hotel as they approached it. "You're going to like the chandelier," she told the elephant solemnly. "It's probably very fancy." Marcus held her hand in the lobby and followed a staff member toward the West Gallery. He was not the kind of man who felt out of place easily. He had learned early that confidence was not about belonging to a room but about deciding that the room had no authority over him, but something in the way Pete had described the evening had not quite settled. He could not name the feeling until he stepped through the gallery doors and heard the laughter. Derek Hollis raised his glass before Marcus had taken 3 steps into the room. His voice carried the specific volume of a man who has rehearsed his cruelty and is proud of the work. He called across the gallery that Marcus had finally arrived, and wasn't the timing perfect, because they had found him the ideal companion for the evening. He gestured broadly toward the center table where Celeste sat with her notebook and her glass of water. He described the pairing, to the laughter of his colleagues, as destiny, a man nobody had thought to set up with a woman everyone had thought to forget. 2 of the men at Derek's table were already laughing. A third had the decency to look at his plate. Sophia pressed herself against Marcus's leg. Marcus did not stop walking. He crossed the gallery at the same pace he had entered it, unhurried, and when he reached the table, he did not look at Derek. He looked at the woman sitting at it and nodded with the courtesy he would offer any stranger. "Good evening," he said simply. Celeste did not look up. She had heard the laughter. She had heard the gesture in Derek's voice, if not every word. She had heard it before in other rooms, in other arrangements, and she had learned that the best response to that kind of laughter was to give it nothing. But she had heard the steady approach of his footsteps across the gallery floor, and something in their rhythm, unhurried, unashamed, made her glance up. Derek, finding that the room had not yet caught fire the way he wanted, pushed back his chair and raised his voice again. He told the gallery that he wanted to propose a toast, to the most well-matched pair of the evening. A man who ate his lunch from a metal tin and a woman who showed up to parties where no one had invited her. He told the room to drink up, because love like this was rare. The laughter that followed was thinner than he had hoped. Fewer glasses raised. One woman at a neighboring table set her fork down and looked at Sophia for the first time. Sophia did not cry. She had learned, in the particular way that children of single fathers who work hard and love quietly sometimes learn, that crying in rooms like this gave the wrong people something. So she held Gray closer and pressed her shoulder into her father's thigh. And then one of Derek's colleagues, a heavy-set man with a wet laugh, leaned toward the room and said that at least the girl had brought a chaperone for the night, and pointed at Sophia. The remark did not land like a joke. It landed like a door slammed in a church. A waiter near the window closed his eyes. Marcus placed his hand, very gently, on his daughter's shoulder. He said quietly to her that she should stand close for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair across from Celeste and offered it to her, with the same gesture, the same absence of theater, with which a man holds a door for a stranger in the rain. He pulled a second chair from the table's edge, settled Sophia into it, placed Gray carefully in her lap. And then he sat across from Celeste and, when she finally raised her eyes, he held her gaze. He said her name was not something he knew. He said that did not matter. He told her that whatever this evening had been constructed to be, she did not deserve to be made into a punchline by men who did not know how to earn the right to speak to her. The tables nearest them went quiet. Celeste looked at him for a long moment. She had been looked at in many ways in the past 6 years. She had been looked at with pity, with curiosity, with that particular brand of social sympathy that is really just self-congratulation dressed up in concern. She did not recognize what she saw on Marcus Calloway's face, because what she saw there was simply that he meant it, and that he had not yet realized there was anything extraordinary about meaning it. The first course arrived in the quiet that had settled over the table, and what happened next happened slowly, the way real things do. Marcus asked her whether she came to events like this often. She told him she had once, in a version of her life that no longer existed. He did not press her on what that meant. She asked him whether he was always that calm. He told her he was not, but that he had a rule about his temper, that Sophia never saw it directed at a person who had not earned it, and that the habit had cost him more difficult evenings than he could count. She glanced at Sophia, who had found a pen in Marcus's jacket pocket and was drawing on the back of a place card with the intensity of an architect. Celeste said, "She trusts you completely." Marcus looked at his daughter for a moment before answering. He said he couldn't give her everything. He said what he could promise was that when he said he'd be somewhere, he would be there. That was the one thing he had decided would never be negotiable. Celeste looked down at her plate. Then she told him a small piece of her story, the fraud, the loss, the accident, the names the city had given her. She did not make it long. She did not perform it. She said it the way you say something true when you have not said it aloud in a long time. Marcus listened without filling the silences. When she had finished, he said quietly that a person worth being kind to didn't need to prove it first. That decency wasn't a reward system. That if he had to know someone's history before deciding to treat them with dignity, he didn't actually believe in dignity. She asked him if he was afraid of being laughed at tonight. He looked at Sophia's small bent head, her careful drawing. He said he was more afraid of what she would think if he hadn't said anything. Sophia had been listening to all of it in the way children listen when they understand more than anyone has given them credit for. She reached into the small pocket of her lavender dress and withdrew a single wrapped peppermint. She slid it across the tablecloth toward Celeste with the deliberate care of a diplomat presenting credentials. She told Celeste that her dad gave her one of these when things got hard. And that Celeste could have this one because she looked like she was working harder than usual tonight. Celeste stared at the candy. Then at the child who had offered it. Then at the man behind her. She asked Sophia, very gently, whether the little girl would have enough left if she gave this one away. Sophia thought about it with genuine seriousness. Then she said she'd still have her dad. So yes. The candy was available. The sentence was not designed to break anyone. That was why it did. Celeste pressed her fingers to her lips. She took a breath. She picked up the peppermint and placed it beside her water glass as though it were something fragile and rare. Derek Hollis could feel the evening slipping away from him, and men like Derek respond to slipping the only way they know, by grabbing harder. He crossed the gallery with his bourbon and stopped at the edge of their table. He looked down at the three of them with an expression he had decided was charming. He said the picture they made was almost sweet. A man playing gentleman on a salary. A woman playing guest in a room that had moved on without her. He said it with a smile that expected applause. Sophia stopped drawing. Marcus set his fork on the rim of his plate without sound. He stood, not fast, not forward, just fully upright. And when he spoke, he did not need volume. He told Derek that he had one question and that he wanted to answer it honestly in front of everyone present. Derek had asked earlier, in so many words, whether Marcus would have chosen to sit at this table if he'd been given any other option. Marcus said yes. He said he would sit at any table where someone was being targeted. Because he could not in any version of himself sit at the table doing the targeting. He said he was not trying to be better than anyone in the room. He was only trying not to become the kind of man his daughter would grow up embarrassed to remember. The gallery went completely still. And then Sophia climbed off her chair. She walked to the space between her father and Derek Hollis, holding Gray against her chest with both arms, and she looked up at Derek and said, in a voice that carried the way small, certain voices do. "My dad says when grown-ups are really kind, they don't make people feel small and then call it funny." She said it the way you report a fact you have been taught and believe completely. Then she turned to Celeste, and held out one small hand, palm up. She said, "If nobody else wants to sit with you, we do." The gallery did not gasp. It did something quieter. It remembered how to be still. The pianist in the adjoining hall let a note hang and did not follow it. A woman in a structured blazer by the window lifted her hand to her mouth. The waiter who had been mid-pour set the bottle down with infinite care. Celeste took Sophia's hand. She did not trust her voice, so she did not use it. And then she was crying, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the way a person cries when they have held it together in front of strangers for so many years that the release, when it finally comes, is almost inaudible. The room cried with her. Not all of it. But enough. Marcus gathered Sophia back against him, pressed his cheek to the top of her head, and told her in a voice that was barely there that she had done something real tonight. The gallery doors opened quietly. Eleanor Voss, the Hargrove Towers general manager, stepped through them with two assistants and the expression of someone who had been searching a building for an hour and had finally found what she was looking for. She crossed directly to Celeste's table. She bowed her head, not the practiced hospitality bow, but something lower, more personal. She called her Ms. Varden. She said the acquisition board was waiting in the main hall and she had not realized Celeste had taken her seat in the West Gallery. The word acquisition moved through the room like a current. Derek's face cycled through 3 different arrangements before settling into something that no longer had a name. Eleanor Voss turned to address the gallery directly, and she chose her words with the precision of 40 years in luxury hospitality. She told the room that Celeste Varden was the founder and chief executive of the newly reconstituted Varden Group. That Varden Group had, as of 9 o'clock that morning, completed the purchase of the Hargrove Tower Hotel. That they were, every one of them, her guests tonight. The room contracted. Not in shock. In recognition. The heavy-set man found something urgent in his napkin. The woman who had whispered about Celeste's family lowered her eyes into her wine. Derek took a half-step backward, as though distance could edit history. Celeste rose from her chair. She did not look at Derek immediately. She straightened the shoulder of her gown, set her napkin on the table, and took one breath. Then she looked at him, fully, without hurry. She told him she was aware he hadn't known who she was. She told him that was the entire point. She said, "You gave yourself permission to be cruel because you had already decided I was no one. That's the only information I needed about you." Derek tried to call it a misunderstanding. He used the word joke the way drowning men use anything. Celeste listened without interrupting. When he finished, she told him quietly that a joke required the person it was aimed at to be able to laugh. She had not been laughing. She turned to Eleanor. She asked for a full accounting of the contractor roster currently servicing the property, the behavioral standards to which vendors were contractually held, and a meeting with legal in the morning. Eleanor wrote. Derek's remaining colleagues at the bar quietly located their coats. Then Celeste did the thing that would define the story later. She turned to the room, not to humiliate, not to triumph, and she said that the most expensive thing in this hotel tonight was not the wine or the chandeliers. It was the choice every person in the room had made in the last hour about who deserved their basic decency. She said some of them had chosen well. She looked at Marcus when she said it. Weeks later, on a soft afternoon in early April, Marcus was tightening a kitchen faucet in a 2-bedroom house at the edge of the city. The house was about to be handed over to a woman named Renata Cole, who had 3 children, a night shift at the hospital, and the particular kind of exhaustion that builds when you have been holding everything up alone for too long. The key program, Celeste had named it simply the second door, had been his idea, quietly. He had mentioned once, in passing, in her office, that what displaced families needed was not charity but continuity. A door that was actually theirs. Celeste had put it into motion within a week. Sophia sat on the front steps drawing suns on a piece of cardboard, one for each house they had visited. Celeste arrived at 4:15 in a soft cream wrap and her hair loose, carrying coffee and sandwiches. She was smiling in a way she had not been at the gala, an easier smile, one that had stopped apologizing for itself. When Renata Cole received the key, she pressed it to her mouth and could not speak for a moment. Marcus stood to one side of the porch and did not step forward. He had decided long before that afternoon that good work did not need a witness to be real. Sophia tugged Celeste's hand and asked with enormous seriousness, "Do you still have it?" Celeste opened her small purse and produced the peppermint, slightly worn at the wrapper's edge from months of being carried, and held it up. She told Sophia she had kept it to remember the night a child taught a room full of adults what they were supposed to already know. Marcus, watching from the porch, had to look up at the pale April sky for a long second before he could trust his face. The story did not end with a ceremony. It ended with 3 people on a porch as the afternoon light went low, a young mother stepping inside a house that finally had her name on the lease, and a quiet understanding among the adults on that porch that something real had been built between them from a single, unremarkable act of choosing to sit down. If there is a lesson in any of it, it is not that kindness is always rewarded. It is that the most lasting kindness a person offers is always the kindness given before they know whether the other person has anything to give in return. Marcus Calloway had not known, on the night of that gala, that the woman across the table owned the building. He had only known that she was a person. That she was being hurt. And that his daughter was watching to see what kind of man her father would choose to be. That had been enough. It had always been enough. If this story found you tonight, if any part of it felt true, leave a like so others can find it too. And if you know someone who needed to hear this, send it to them without explaining why. They'll know.